And since the folks who ran the curriculum weren't ready at this time to start making any major changes, the students started making changes for them. Okay, you're not going to teach us about current events, you're not going to teach us about literature. We'll form our own group. So they formed literary societies and debating clubs in which they would discuss moral and intellectual issues of the day. I mean, we got our Latin, Greek, and mathematics in class. Let's talk about some of the interesting stuff in the literary society or in the debating club. This leads to literary magazines. And as the schools start to get with the program, one of the answers is in a senior course in moral and intellectual philosophy, which is usually taught by the president. I think I may have alluded to this before, but the president was the man on campus in those days. Probably the best teacher and maybe the only real one. Reasoning, natural law versus theology versus Christian law. Heady stuff for a college administrator to be discussing with students. Another item, controversial commencement speakers. We don't do as much of this today as we used to, but the convention or the commencement speaker would be expected in these days to come in and challenge the students, to press a problem before them and ask them to think about it and perhaps solve it. Greek letter fraternity movement begins around this time. Social clubs as well. The creation of these two, the Greek letter and the social clubs, precipitates a decline in the literary societies. I guess the emotional social pull versus a curriculum vacuum was a little much. Gymnasia and organized athletics also appear. Outdoor, indoor gymnasia, gymnasium clubs. 1852 Harvard versus Yale in rowing, the first official collegiate athletic event. 1859, many schools are engaging in baseball, intercollegiate baseball. Can football be far behind, you say? State universities, undertaken in 3 waves. The first wave came in the wake of the Revolution, and it was mostly in the South. And you'll see why we had our little question on the first state university. Georgia was chartered in 1785. Now that was the first one chartered. It first held classes, however, in 1801. North Carolina, though it was chartered 4 years later in 1789, held its classes before Georgia. It held its first classes in 1795. So which was the first state university? Well, it was either Georgia or North Carolina, depending upon which color you like best, I guess. Those patterned after Ohio University, these are the ones that had to do with the Northwest ordinances, tied to the establishment of states. Many of the new states created a college at the time. This is not Ohio State. This is Ohio University. It's not the Ohio State anymore either. It's the Ohio State University. These institutions were mainly in the Midwest and West. The Dartmouth College decision we've heard of before. I wanted to bring it up again Daniel Webster, remember, was the lawyer for Dartmouth. This had to do with state takeovers of private institutions. This guarded against state takeovers. Webster was the lawyer for Dartmouth. They went to the Supreme Court, and Webster argued successfully for independent institutions to have the right to be independent and not be taken over by the state. Well, I think you can see why I've got this listed with state universities, because after this particular time, the states cut back significantly on how they were supporting their institutions. So really, the third wave of state universities was the moral land grant institutions. These began in 1872. They were A&M institutions. These institutions taught agriculture, they taught the mechanic arts, and for the ladies, they also taught home economics. Now, why the H is not included in there, I do not know. In 1890, black A&M institutions were created in the 14 states of the old Confederacy. So this is the last of the wave of state universities, or the last of the wave in the last century. Post-World War II, many of the state systems were expanded and satellite institutions were created. Many system mergers in the 1970s. So many of the state universities that we know today were created here in the 1950s through 1970s. The rise of the sciences. Going to talk about Benjamin Rush, going to talk about Benjamin Silliman at Yale, the rise of scientific schools, and then finally the Wayland Report to Brown. Wayland was a Brown president. Benjamin Rush was born in 1745 on Byberry Plantation, which was located near Philadelphia. His father died in 1750. He was raised by his aunt and uncle. He attended Princeton University, graduated from there. I guess he must have been, 15 years old? After graduation, he studied medicine in Philadelphia under Dr. John Redmond. He then completed the degree at Edinburgh, that's over in Scotland, and trained at St. Thomas Hospital in London. He returns to Philadelphia in 1769, where he practices medicine. He also teaches chemistry at the University of Philadelphia. Now, I don't know if it was going as the University of Philadelphia or not. It may have still been Benjamin Franklin's Academy. This is in those cloudy years that I'm not too sure about the University of Philadelphia and the Academy in Philadelphia. But Benjamin Rush was a teacher of chemistry. He authored on many topics, meaning he wrote numerous articles on any number of various topics. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, meaning he had to have been a Pennsylvania representative to the Continental Congress. He was Surgeon General of the Continental Army. He finally got into a dispute with General Washington and was let go from that capacity. In 1799, the American Philosophical Society had a contest, and people wrote essays on the future of American education. Benjamin Rush wrote one of those entries, and in it he stressed the need for science study at the expense of Latin and Greek. Remember, this is way before anything besides Latin, Greek, or even mathematics was in the curriculum. He said, as part of his essay, To spend 4 or 5 years in learning 2 dead languages is to turn our backs on a gold mine in order to amuse ourselves catching butterflies. Benjamin Silliman was born in 1779. He graduated Yale in 1796. In 1802, he was appointed Yale Professor of Chemistry and Natural History. In 1818, he founded the American Journal of Science and Arts. Benjamin became a magnet for aspiring students of science. People would come to Yale to study science under Silliman. Although it wasn't one of the required things. Remember, what did you study at colleges? Latin and Greek. If you studied science, it was a I don't want to say non-counting, but it did not count toward a degree. Benjamin Silliman was one of his students who went on in chemistry. His son-in-law James Dwight Dana was a mineralogist. Amos Eaton and Asa Gray were famous botanists who also trained under Silliman at Yale.